My name is Adrian. I was 38 years old when I sat in a rented gray Corolla on a side street in Savannah, Georgia, and watched my husband of 14 years carry another woman's suitcase up the steps of a bed and breakfast. Not a church van, not a group of deacons. Her. 4 marches of packing his cooler, 4 marches of praying over him at the door, 4 marches of me covering the mortgage and the property taxes and the quarterly estimates while he was gone. $38,000 I later traced out of accounts I had filled myself, dollar by dollar, client by client, through 14 tax seasons. Money from my firm, my 80-hour Februaries. He thought I was too buried in other people's finances to look at my own. What he didn't know was that I had already photographed the loan file in our filing cabinet, and that the signature on page 4 wasn't mine. I have never signed my name that way in my life. Before we get into this, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today, and if this is the kind of story you stay for, hit subscribe because the one I'm telling tomorrow cuts deeper than this one. I made peach cobbler the night before he left. Every year. His mother's recipe, the one with too much nutmeg, the one I burned the first time I tried it, and cried over in our first apartment because I wanted so badly for her to like me. By the 4th year, I could make it without measuring. The kitchen would fill up with brown sugar and butter, and I would move around that stove the way I move around everything. Hands busy, mind 3 steps ahead. That's who I am. Adrian Weathersby, 38 years old, certified public accountant, owner of a 4-person tax and bookkeeping firm on Gervais Street in Columbia, South Carolina. I started it in a rented room above a barber shop with a folding table and a second-hand printer, and 11 clients, 9 of whom were people from my mother's church who felt sorry for me. I have 240 clients now. I've never missed a filing deadline. Not once, not in 14 years, not the year my mother died. I am not a woman who panics. I read patterns. Numbers tell on people. They always have. A man can tell you he's fine every single morning for 2 years, and his checking account will tell you the truth in about 90 seconds. I've watched it happen with clients. A business owner sits across my desk, saying everything's steady, and I'm looking at a statement that says he's been paying his brother-in-law $900 a month for a job that doesn't exist. Numbers don't have a stake in your feelings. That's what I love about them. Julian and I met at a stewardship workshop, if you can believe that. He was 26 and running the soundboard, and he asked me a question about depreciation, like it was the most interesting thing in the room. He was operations manager at a medical distribution warehouse out by the interstate. He was warm in that particular way, where people leave a conversation with him feeling like they'd been the most fascinating person he'd met all week. He made me feel that way for a very long time, and I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories go. I loved him. It wasn't habit. It wasn't fear of being alone. I chose him actively, deliberately, for 14 years, the way you choose to keep watering a plant. I was all the way in. The men's retreat was tradition. Every March, 4 days, and by year 3 he wasn't just attending it, he was leading it. Devotionals. A schedule printed on cardstock. He'd come home Sunday night with his voice hoarse and his eyes soft, and he'd say, "The Lord did something out there, Adrian." And I believed him, because why on earth wouldn't I? He came home rested. He came home kind. I got 4 days of eating cereal for dinner and sleeping across the whole bed and catching up on the correspondence I let stack up all winter. I loved those 4 days, too. That's the part that still sits crooked in me. 3 years into our marriage, he had a spinal fusion. February 8th. I closed the office for 11 days in the middle of tax season, refunded 3 retainers, lost 2 commercial clients to a firm on Main Street who never gave them back. I didn't hesitate. I slept in a chair. I helped him to the bathroom. I learned how to change a dressing from a YouTube video at 2 in the morning because I was too embarrassed to call the nurse line again. He grabbed my wrist one night, weak as a child, and said, "You're going to resent this someday." I told him I wouldn't. I meant it. God help me. I meant every word I ever said to that man. This March was different, and I couldn't have pointed at one thing and told you why. It wasn't a smell. It wasn't lipstick. It was a shift in the pattern, and I have spent my entire adult life being paid to notice shifts in patterns. He put in for his time off 3 weeks earlier than usual. He started taking calls in the garage. Not the yard, not the porch, the garage with the door pulled down. And when I asked him what the theme was this year, he said grace without looking up from his phone. Just the word. Flat. Set down like a coaster. Maybe it was nothing. I stirred the cobbler filling and told myself it was nothing. But here's the thing about being a woman who notices. You can't unnotice. And standing at that stove, I thought about the envelope. 4 months earlier, in November, I'd gone into the garage to find the extension cord, and there was a stack of mail on his workbench, weeks old, curling at the corners. Junk, mostly. And underneath it, a windowed envelope from Palmetto Heritage Credit Union. We don't bank at Palmetto Heritage. We never have. I picked it up. It said Annual Disclosure Notice, and it was addressed to Mr. Julian Weathersby. And beneath that, on the second line, it said Mrs. Adrian Weathersby. I stood in that garage with the extension cord in one hand and that envelope in the other for a full minute. Then I opened it, because I'm not a saint. It was a boilerplate rate disclosure. A line of credit, $75,000. When I asked him, he laughed. He said the credit union solicits everybody, said it was a pre-approval offer, said he'd tossed 6 of them last year. He said it so easily, so fast, that I felt small for asking. He kissed my forehead and took the envelope out of my hand and dropped it in the recycling bin and said, "Baby, you'd know before I did." I let it go. That's the sentence I've had to live with. Not the affair. Not even the money. I let it go. I am a woman who charges clients $300 an hour to not let things go, and I let it go. In my own house, about my own name. I turned the burner down. I picked up my phone and I called Zora. Zora has been mine since our sophomore year at Benedict. When she talked me out of dropping a statistics class, I ended up making a career out of. She's a charge nurse in an emergency department now, which means she has spent 20 years being the calmest person in a room full of the worst night of somebody's life. She's the only person on earth who will tell me the truth before I've asked for it. She picked up on the second ring, and I didn't dress it up. "Something is wrong with this trip," I said. "With all of them. And I can't tell you why, and I can't prove it, and I need you to tell me I'm not crazy." There was a pause. Not long. "You're not crazy," she said. "So go see for yourself." The next morning, Julian left for work at 6:50 like always. I waited until his taillights turned at the stop sign. Then I sat at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee I never drank, and I started working the problem. He'd mentioned the place once. Not to me. Exactly. He'd been on the phone in the car about a year back, half laughing about a mix-up with the rooms, and he'd said the name out loud. The Cordwainer House. Savannah. I hadn't tried to remember it. My brain just keeps things. It always has. It keeps the things the rest of me would rather set down. I found it online in 40 seconds. A restored Victorian on a square 8 rooms. The kind of place that doesn't post its rates on the front page. Not a retreat center. Not a bunkhouse. There wasn't a fellowship hall within a mile of it. I called the front desk, and I made my voice bright. I said I was confirming a block reservation my husband's church had put down, that we'd had a mix-up with the emails, that I just wanted to make sure everything was set. I gave them the church's name. Then his. The woman typed for a while. "I don't have anything under a church," she said, "and I'm not showing a group booking for those dates at all." "Would it be under an individual?" I said I must have the wrong property. I thanked her. I hung up. Then I opened the Notes app on my phone, and I typed the date, the time of the call, the name of the woman I'd spoken to, and exactly what she'd said, word for word. I wrote it down. That was the first one. I want you to understand what I was doing, because a lot of people don't. I wasn't building a case against my husband yet. I didn't know there was a case. I was doing the only thing I know how to do when a number won't reconcile, which is to stop guessing and start documenting. Grief is a thing you can schedule. Information has a window. Then I texted Deacon Wallace Pruitt, who has known Julian since they were 19, who called me his favorite sister at a fish fry 2 summers ago. "Hey, Wallace." "Julian's not picking up. Can you have him call me when there's a break in the schedule?" "Nothing urgent." 22 seconds. I counted them. "Hey, Adrian." "Girl, we haven't done the men's retreat since 2021. Church cut the budget. Everything okay?" I set my phone face down on the table. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a garbage truck was working its way up the block, and I sat there in the house I picked out the lot for, and I understood that I had cooked a peach cobbler every March for 4 years, for a thing that did not exist. I picked the phone back up. I screenshotted the text. I saved it in a folder. I named the folder something boring. I wrote it down. I booked a coach seat on a Friday morning flight and paid for it out of my own personal account, the one I've had since I was 22, the one that has never had another name attached to it. I want to say that plainly for anybody listening who's married. Keep one account that is only yours. Not because you're planning to leave, because you're planning to be a person. Julian left on a Thursday. He kissed me at the door and held the back of my head with his hand the way he does, and he told me he'd call when they got settled, and he said, "Have a good week, sweetheart." I told him to drive safe. I stood in the doorway. I watched his truck go all the way to the corner. Then I finished packing. I landed in Savannah a little after 1 and picked up a rental so plain it was practically invisible, and before I left the lot I opened the phone plan app. He'd been on my plan for 11 years. I paid that bill on the 5th of every month. His location pinged at a residential address in the historic district, 4 blocks off Forsyth Park, and it wasn't the Cordwainer house. It was a bed and breakfast with a wrought iron fence and a magnolia in the yard that must have been 90 years old. I parked across the street and down 2 doors under the shade with a clear line to the front steps. I shut the engine off, and I sat. I was calm. I need you to hear that. Not numb. I know the difference. I've been numb. I was numb for 6 weeks after my mother died. This was the opposite. Everything was turned up. I could hear a wind chime somewhere. I noticed the exact color of the shutters. I noticed my hands were perfectly steady on the wheel, and I thought, well, that's information too. I thought about the cobbler, about standing at that stove for 4 years, about the year I skipped my own continuing education because he had a cold and looked pitiful on the couch. An hour and 10 minutes, then a silver sedan pulled up, and he got out of the passenger side laughing, and went around to the trunk. He looked exactly like himself, the gray quarter zip I'd folded into his bag on Wednesday, that easy loose walk he has. He lifted out a suitcase that was not his, and he carried it, and a woman came around the back of the car and put her hand flat on his chest, right over the sternum, and said something to him, and he laughed again, with his head tipped back. I picked up my phone, and I started taking pictures. She went up the steps first. He followed with the suitcase. The door closed. I didn't move. My jaw locked so hard I felt it in my ears, and that was the only thing my body decided to do. And then the second thing hit, a half-second behind the first. I knew her. Not from a conversation, not by name, not then. From a photograph. Our church puts a directory online, and last spring I sat in a dentist's waiting room and scrolled it while they ran late. And there was a page for the worship ministry, and there was a woman in the second row of the choir, and I had looked at her face for maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds. 18 months ago. My brain kept her anyway. It always keeps them. Kendra. Kendra Sable. She led the Sunday morning praise set. She had sung at my mother's funeral. I put the phone down on the passenger seat, and I breathed with my mouth open like a woman who'd been running. Then I picked it back up, and I opened my notes, and I typed the date, the time, the address, the make and color of the car, the plate number, and the number of photographs I had taken. 11. I wrote it down. I drove to my hotel out by the airport. I ordered a chicken sandwich from room service because it was the first thing on the menu, and when it came, I moved it to the desk and never touched it. I remember the smell of it in that room for hours. I opened my laptop and pulled up the credit union's website. I created a login. I entered his social security number, which I know by heart, because I have prepared our joint return for 14 years. It asked for a password. I tried the one we use for everything. Wrong. I tried his mother's maiden name. I tried the street we lived on when we married. I tried the name of the dog we buried in 2019, and cried over like she was a child. Locked. Please visit a branch. I closed the laptop and lay back on that hotel bed with my shoes still on and looked at the ceiling and thought, he built a door in my house that I don't have a key to. He built it while I was at the office. He built it with money I made, and that's when I remembered the funeral. My mother died in February 3 years ago, fast at the end. Julian sat with me on a folding chair by the grave with the tent flapping and both my hands inside both of his, and he leaned in close and said, "You'll never carry anything alone again." I built the next 3 years of my life on that sentence. I got up. I found a flight home for Saturday afternoon, early enough that I'd be unpacked and have something on the stove before he ever pulled into the driveway. I booked it without hesitating, and I made the only decision that mattered that night. Not what I'd say, not what I'd do. I decided that I would go home and I would smile and I would show him absolutely nothing, and I would not move 1 inch until I knew everything. Zora called me from the parking lot of her hospital on Sunday. I told her all of it. The steps, the suitcase, the hand on his chest, the woman who had stood at the front of a church in a black dress and sung my mother into the ground. Zora was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "Adrienne, why is he still in your house? Change the locks tonight. Put his clothes on the lawn. I will drive down there and help you." And listen, everything in me wanted that. Everything in me wanted the lawn and the trash bags and the neighbors watching. I have thought about it since. I've imagined it the way you imagine a car crash you didn't have. But I'd already run the numbers. If I throw him out tonight, I said, then tomorrow he has all day and nobody watching. He moves whatever's left, he opens something new. He gets his story straight with her. And by the time a judge hears about any of it, it's just a hysterical wife with 11 blurry pictures and a feeling. So you're just going to live with him? For a few weeks, Adrienne, Zora. Patience isn't weakness. I was watching a woman across the street strap a toddler into a car seat. It's compound interest. She let out a long breath. She didn't say she agreed. She said, "Then I'm calling you every single day at 9, and she did for 26 days straight, and she never once forgot. He came home Saturday at 5:40. I heard his key, I heard the bag hit the entry floor, one thud, then the pause while he towed off his boots. Same sounds, same order, 14 years of the same order. I turned from the stove and put a face on. Something warm. I'd been practicing it since the Savannah airport. He came into the kitchen looking rested. That's what got me. Not guilty. Rested. Loose in the shoulders. He crossed the room and he kissed my cheek, put his mouth on my face, and he said the retreat was powerful this year. Said God moved. Said he'd missed my cooking. I said I was glad. I turned back to the pan. Then I said I'd forgotten something in the car, and I went out into the driveway, and I stood behind the open trunk lid where he couldn't see me from the window, and I scrubbed at my cheek with the heel of my hand until the skin went hot. Where had that mouth been? Where had that mouth been? Then I fixed my face and went back in and asked him about the drive. Dinner was pleasant. That's the word I keep landing on, and it's still the ugliest word I know. He was funny. He asked about my clients, asked whether the new software was still giving Bernadette fits at the front desk, refilled my water without being asked. And I watched him the way I watch a client who's smiling too much while I'm looking at his receivables. I watched where the performance got just slightly louder than it needed to be. A real feeling doesn't work that hard. He was asleep by 10:40. I know because his breathing dropped into that heavy, unbothered rhythm of a man with nothing on his conscience, or nothing he's willing to feel. At 11:15, I took my phone into the laundry room and called my Aunt Verna. Verna is my mother's older sister, and for 31 years she was a branch manager at a bank that doesn't exist anymore, and she has spent her whole life watching numbers tell on people. She picked up on the second ring at 11:15 at night, and I said, "I need somebody who knows how a loan file is supposed to look." There was one beat of silence. "Tuesday," she said. 6 o'clock. Have the papers on the table and don't touch anything with wet hands. She didn't ask if I was okay. Verna has always understood that love sometimes sounds like logistics. Monday, I saw 4 clients and reviewed a partnership return and drove home and made red beans and waited for him to fall asleep. Then, I went into the office we've always called the junk room, and I pulled every folder in the cabinet. Tax returns, mortgage, homeowners, life insurance, 3 years of paper that told the story of our financial life or the story I'd been reading. Tuesday came in cold and wet. Julian had a work dinner, he said, a vendor thing. He mentioned it while he poured his coffee, casual as weather, and I said have a good time and thought, perfect. Verna arrived at 6 on the dot with her readers already on. She didn't hug me. She looked at that kitchen table, buried edge to edge in paper. She set her purse on the counter. She sat down, and she said, "Tell me every account you know about." So I talked, and she read while I talked, which is a thing I have never seen another human being do. She'd pick up a statement, scan it, set it face down in a new pile, and ask a question without lifting her eyes. Not "How does that make you feel?" Not once. She asked, "When does this transfer first appear? What was the stated purpose? Whose name is on the signature card? Who's the notary?" She found it in 19 minutes. "Here." She slid a joint checking statement on a line, and here and here. Transfers, the 3rd of the month, almost every month, sometimes 600, sometimes 9. Twice, 1,400. Memo line said ministry, no payee. Just a routing number she copied onto a legal pad and had me look up on my phone. Palmetto Heritage Credit Union. "That's not a ministry," Verna said. She didn't make it a question. We kept going. She had me pull my firm's returns 3 years, and she walked through what my income put into that household against what his salary covered. It wasn't complicated once she laid it flat. My business had grown. Every year, more. And a steady slice of every year had gone quietly out the side door into an account with exactly one name on it. She wrote for a while. Then she tapped the pad. $38,000, she said. 31 months. That's your money, Adrian. I knew it already. Hearing it in Verna's flat teller window voice put it somewhere else in my body. Then she picked up the folder I'd been avoiding. The one from Palmetto Heritage that I'd found in the back of the cabinet behind the homeowner's policy. The closing packet for a $75,000 home equity line of credit against the house I have paid the note on since 2014. She turned to page 4. She held it up to the light over the table like a woman checking a bill for a watermark. "That's not your hand," she said. It wasn't. The A was wrong. I loop the A. Whoever wrote it printed it, then went back and put a tail on it, and it looked like my signature the way a stranger's face looks like your cousin's in a dark bar. And then I looked at the date on the notary block. March 14th, 3 years ago, 2 weeks and 2 days after we buried my mother, the second day of what he called the retreat. He wasn't in Savannah on March 14th. He was 11 miles from our front door, in a credit union branch off Two Notch Road, telling a notary public that the woman standing beside him was his wife. I looked at that stamp for a long time. Verna didn't say anything. She let me have it. You want to know what financial betrayal actually feels like. It isn't rage, not first. It's arithmetic. It's standing in your own kitchen, adding up every hour you worked and everything you went without, and every check you wrote for a life you thought you were building, and watching the total walk out the door with somebody who held both your hands at a graveside and told you that you'd never carry anything alone again. That's the number that won't reconcile. That's the one that keeps you up. Verna took her glasses off, and then she said the thing I'd been waiting 3 days to hear from somebody who wasn't me. Now listen to me, because this is the whole ballgame. You do not say one word to that man, not one. If he knows you know, that line of credit gets drawn to the limit by Friday, and that account gets emptied by Monday, and you will spend 2 years and $40,000 in attorney's fees trying to prove a thing you can prove right now, tonight, for free. She tapped the table. Photograph every page before you put it back. Every page, tonight. Then you put that folder back exactly the way you found it, crooked if it was crooked. And you go on and make his breakfast. How long? 3 weeks, she said. Maybe 4. You'll know. I photographed 81 pages between 6:52 and 7:31. I put every folder back. There was a water bill sticking up 1/2 inch out of the tab, and I left it sticking up 1/2 inch, because I was not about to lose this on a water bill. Then Verna washed her hands at my sink and dried them on my dish towel, and said something I've thought about probably 400 times since. Baby, hear me. There's nothing wrong with a joint account. Your mama and your daddy had one for 30 years. The problem is a joint account where one signature can move the money. Call the bank. Ask them for dual authorization on transfers over a certain amount. Most of them can do it, and none of them will offer it. Set an alert on every transaction over $300 and set it to your phone and put a password on the account he doesn't have. Pull your credit report. You can do it free 3 times a year. And I don't care how busy you are, do it in January when everybody's got a resolution anyway. And a home equity line. Both spouses have to sign in front of a notary. So if you ever get so much as a rate disclosure in the mail with your name on it and you don't remember signing anything, you call that lender and you ask for a copy of the closing packet. They have to give it to you. It's your name. She put on her coat. Nobody teaches us this, she said. Church tells you to be one flesh. Nobody tells you the bank doesn't know what that means. Julian came home at 9:20 smelling like a steakhouse, and somebody else's confidence. He asked if I'd eaten. I said I had. I did not sleep. Wednesday, Zora called at 9 and then again at 4, and the second call she was careful. She'd gone sideways through a woman she knew from her church, asked one question in a way that didn't sound like a question. Last year's Christmas banquet. The one I missed because a client's payroll audit blew up at 6 in the evening, and I spent 4 hours on the phone with the state. Julian had brought Kendra, not as choir staff, not as part of a group. He brought her the way you bring somebody you want to be seen with. They came in together. They sat together. He introduced her to people. People who had shaken my hand at 3 of those banquets. People who had asked about my firm. People who knew my name and looked at that woman and heard whatever he said when he said hers. I sat in my car in the parking garage with the engine running, and I finally understood the thing I'd been refusing to understand. This was not a mistake that got long. This wasn't guilt he'd been carrying around, waiting for the right night to set down. He was building a life with her. In public. In the city where I live. In the church my mother joined in 1979. 10 days later, I was at the Publix on Forest Drive at 7 in the evening, and I turned into the cereal aisle, and she was there. Kendra Sable. In a school hoodie, holding a box of granola bars, she recognized me before I could arrange my face. And here's what she did. She didn't run, and she didn't stammer. She looked at me the way you look at somebody you have already had 100 imaginary conversations with, and she said, "Adrienne, I've wanted to talk to you." I didn't say anything. She said, "I want you to know I never wanted this to be a secret. He told me you two were basically done. He said you'd been done for years. He said you were just waiting until his mother passed. His mother is 74 years old and does water aerobics on Tuesdays." Kendra's eyes were wet. She meant it. That's the part I couldn't get out from under for weeks afterward. She absolutely meant it. He had sold her the same product he'd been selling me, just a different model year. I stood there with a cart and a gallon of milk, and I said the only true thing I had. "He sang at my mother's funeral," I said. "No, you did." He held my hand. Then I walked to the register and paid and put the milk in the car and sat there until my breathing came back. And then I opened my notes and I typed the date, the time, the store, and every word she'd said as close as I could get it. I wrote it down. That week he came home with flowers, not the good ones, the grocery store bucket kind, wrapped in cellophane. He set them on the counter and kissed my temple and said we were overdue for a real trip, just us somewhere warm. Said I worked too hard, said I deserved it. I said that sounded nice. He went to change clothes, and I stood at the sink with my hands in the water and thought, he's not sorry, he's positioning. 14 years, and I never once saw him do it to me, and now I couldn't see anything else. 4 days after the flowers, he brought a folder to dinner. He set it beside my plate before he sat down, easy as a napkin. He said he'd been looking at a refinance, said rates had moved, said we were sitting on equity doing nothing. 3 pages clipped, a sticky note on top with a figure circled in blue pen. 14 years teaches you the difference between a man's "this is good for us" face and his "this is good for me" face. He was wearing the second one, barely, and I saw it. He'd watched me sign things before without reading them. Insurance riders, a car loan. He'd hand me the pen mid-sentence and I'd sign because I trusted the hand. That hand had printed my name on page 4 while my mother's grave was still settling. "Let me read it first," I said. "Course, take your time. It's routine." He smiled and picked up his fork, and his eyes were doing arithmetic behind it. And he was not nearly as good at that as he thought. I knew what a refinance would do. It would roll the HELOC into the first mortgage and bury the forged signature under a new closing. And every dollar of equity we'd built would come out the other side, and the trail would go cold. I set the folder next to my plate. We finished dinner. He went to bed thinking I'd get around to it. The next morning, I called a family law attorney. Her office was on the 11th floor of a building downtown, and the window behind her looked out over a city that was going about its business while mine was being taken apart on her desk. She was in her 60s and she did not offer me tissues, and I could have kissed her for that. I brought everything. The photographs from Savannah, time-stamped, the transfer schedule Verna built, the closing packet, the Publix conversation dated. Wallace's text. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "Are you telling me," she said, "that you can prove you were not in that branch on March 14th? I put a hotel folio on her desk, Charlotte, North Carolina. A 2-day continuing education seminar on partnership taxation, March 13th through 15th, 3 years ago. My name on the registration. My badge photo. A restaurant charge at 12:40 p.m. on the 14th, 130 miles from that credit union. She sat back in her chair. "Mrs. Weathersby," she said, "the affair is a fact. The transfers are a fact. This," she put 2 fingers on the notary page, "is a felony." She told me 3 things. South Carolina divides marital property equitably, and the $38,000 was marital property no matter whose name sat on the account, and it would come back into the pot. He could not refinance without me, and I would never sign. And the moment we filed, she'd move for temporary orders freezing every marital asset so he couldn't touch a dollar. Then she said, "And the loan is not a divorce matter. That's the credit union's fraud department, and if they want it, the sheriff's. That's a separate letter. You decide if you send it." I walked out of that building with something I hadn't had in a month, and it wasn't peace. It was a map. I sent the letter. 9 days later, with an affidavit, the folio, the seminar certificate, and a handwriting sample of my actual signature going back to 2012. I want to be careful how I say this next part, because people hear it wrong. I didn't do it to hurt him. There is a version of me that wanted to hurt him, and she and I had some late nights. But what I actually did was fill out a form. I told the truth to the right people, in the right format, in the right order. Everything after that was institutions doing exactly what they were designed to do. Anger is a withdrawal. Documentation is a deposit. Then I called Julian's mother. Miss Ernestines has loved me from the first Sunday. The kind of woman who calls on a Thursday for no reason, who remembers I don't eat pork, who told me once at her kitchen sink quietly that her son had gotten far more than he'd earned when he got me, and that she hoped he knew it. I stood in the hallway with the TV going in the next room, and I kept my voice light, and I told her I was planning Sunday dinner together, and it would mean everything to have her there. She was quiet. Then she said, "Adrienne, is my son all right?" "Come Sunday," I said. Then I called Verna. "Sunday 2:00, I need you." She said, "What am I bringing?" And then I called Pastor Rayfield Gaines, who married us in 2011, who buried my mother, and I asked him to come to my house on Sunday afternoon. And when he asked what for, I said, "Because I need a witness who isn't kin." Saturday night, Julian came to bed before me. I locked up, turned off the kitchen light, and lay down beside him in the dark. After a minute, he reached over and found my hand and closed his fingers around it. I let him. I lay there with my eyes open and thought about the folder on my desk and the 3 people who'd be sitting at my table, and I listened to his breathing go slow and heavy and untroubled. He fell asleep holding my hand, and he had no idea what Sunday was. Sunday came in mild and bright. He made coffee. I made a roast. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, and it was ordinary, it was so ordinary, and he moved around that kitchen the way a man does when he thinks he's safe. Verna came at 2. Miss Ernestine at 10 past. Pastor Gaines at 2:30, in his church clothes, with his Bible under his arm because that man does not leave the house without it. I set the table for 5. The good plates, cloth napkins, water already poured, and beside my plate, flat and unremarkable as a magazine, the folder. He saw it when he sat down. Something moved behind his eyes, quick, one frame. And then he covered it with a smile and reached for his glass, and his hand went a little too carefully. Nobody said grace. He lasted maybe 4 minutes. "Adrienne," that voice. The one he uses on a vendor call when the room's getting away from him. "Whatever you think you know, I need you to let me talk first. I can explain all of it. Kendra, it's not what it looks like. It got away from me, I'll own that, but it never meant anything. I was already pulling back. I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right time." His mother was not looking at me. She was looking at her son, and her hands were folded, and her face had gone somewhere I had never seen it go in 14 years. He kept talking. That's what a cornered man does. He fills all the air in the room. He talked about the promotion that never came. about feeling invisible in his own house, about how the marriage got routine, and his voice had that particular thin texture of a man improvising and hoping volume will pass for truth. I let him run. Julian runs out of words faster than most people because he has always had me to fill the quiet when it got uncomfortable. I didn't fill anything. He stopped. I opened the folder. "I'm not going to talk about her," I said. "I'm here to talk about the money," and I walked them through it, page by page. The transfers on the 3rd of the month, 31 months, $38,000 out of the account my firm fed, into an account with one name on it. I laid the statements down in a line like cards. Then I put the closing packet on top. "You took a $75,000 line of credit against this house." I turned it to page 4 and slid it toward his mother, not toward him. "That's not my signature. That's your printing, and the notary block is dated March 14th. Miss Ernestine put on her glasses. "2 weeks after we buried my mother," I said. "The same weekend you told me you were in Savannah praying. Julian, you were on Two Notch Road." Pastor Gaines set his fork down and did not pick it up again. Julian's jaw went tight. I watched him check the exits, one after another, and find them all closed. And when a man can't get out, he turns around and comes at you. "You want to know the real problem?" His voice climbed. "You were never here. 14 years and you were at that office. Every February you disappear. I sat in this house by myself. I tried to tell you I was drowning and you'd say after the 15th, baby, after the 15th. Don't sit there like you're the only one who lost something. Maybe if you'd given me half the attention you gave that appointment book, none of this would have. My work paid for that chair." 5 words, flat, no shake in them. He blinked. His mother made a sound she swallowed immediately. I didn't give him room to recover. I slid the second document across the table. The petition already drafted, clean and correct. I didn't ask him to sign it. My attorney would handle that. I needed him to see it. I needed him to understand there was no version of that afternoon that ended with him sleeping in that house. Then I said my number. Once. I didn't repeat it and I didn't explain it. The house, free and clear, in my name alone, my firm untouched, and $164,000. He went gray. "Adrienne, think about what you're doing. This ends everything. You want to torch 14 years? I looked at him across a table we bought together at an estate sale in Camden. "No," I said. "I'm keeping the parts that were mine." The room went quiet. Then Pastor Gaines stood up. He didn't say a word to Julian. He didn't say a word to me. He picked up his Bible from beside his plate, and he held it against his chest, with both hands like a man holding something he had just watched somebody drop, and he walked out of my dining room, and I heard the screen door close. And Miss Ernestine got up. She took her purse off the back of the chair. She stopped beside me and put her dry old hand on the crown of my head the way she'd done at my mother's wake, and she leaned down and said one thing, and she said it to me and not to him. "Call me Sunday, baby. I'm still your mother." Then she left, too. He packed on Tuesday. I didn't help, and I didn't hover. I sat in the kitchen with coffee while he moved through the house with a duffel and the terrible efficiency of a man who knows he has no leverage. He took his clothes, his shaving kit, the charger off his nightstand. He left the furniture. He left 14 years of accumulated life exactly where it sat, because there was no world in which he asked me for one lamp, and I didn't reach for the folder. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. I felt him wanting to say something. One more angle, one more reframe. I looked at him and I waited. He didn't say anything. The front door closed. I went to the window and watched his truck back out and reach the street and turn left and go. Then I went to my desk and finished the affidavit because I had a client at 11. 14 weeks later, the credit union's fraud unit closed the line and reversed it off the house. They didn't press charges. They referred it, and the solicitor's office looked at it and made whatever calculation those offices make, and in the end Julian signed a restitution agreement and a consent order, and he will be paying that back until he is 58 years old. The lien came off my deed on a Thursday in July. I framed the letter. It's in the junk room. The church did what the church does, which is slower and quieter, and in some ways, worse. He resigned as deacon before the board could vote. He was removed from the finance committee. He'd been on that committee 11 years and had signed off on the church's own bank statements, and I know for a fact that some people in that congregation lay awake over that. Kendra left in September. Not fired, nobody fires a volunteer worship leader, but there's a way a church can make a room too small to stand in. She moved to Charlotte. She didn't get the man, and she didn't get the apartment on Divine Street either, because the person co-signing it was a man with a restitution order and no equity in anything. The divorce was final on a Wednesday in October. My attorney called while I was between appointments, and I stepped into my office and shut the door, and she said, "It's done. The house is yours, the firm is yours, and the restitution figure was accepted and entered." I thanked her. She said I was welcome with the particular warmth of a professional who takes quiet pleasure in clean work. I hung up. I sat down in my chair, in the office I built out of a rented room above a barber shop, and I didn't move for 1 entire minute. 8 months later, he texted me. 2 paragraphs. He'd been in counseling. He understood things now. He wasn't asking for anything, he said, though of course he was. I read it twice. I did not answer it. I deleted the thread, and then I went and emptied the deleted folder too, and then I finished loading the dishwasher. Last spring, I took the wedding portrait down from the hallway. I hadn't meant to. I was carrying a laundry basket past it, and I just stopped, and I looked at us. 24 and 27, standing on the steps of a church I don't attend anymore, and I set the basket down and lifted the frame off the nail. Behind it, the paint was 2 shades lighter, a perfect bright rectangle where 14 years of sun hadn't touched. I stood there and looked at that rectangle for a long time. I painted the whole hall the next Saturday. A deep green, the color of a magnolia leaf in the middle of June, nobody's preference to manage but my own, music going, windows open. 2 coats. I did it myself. I have a paint drip on the baseboard I've decided to keep. And where the portrait had been, I hung a photograph my mother took in 2011. It's me at 26, standing on the sidewalk outside that rented room above the barber shop, squinting into the sun, holding a folding table under one arm because the delivery guy left it at the curb. I look ridiculous. I look about 19. I look like a woman who has absolutely no idea what she's about to build and is going to do it anyway. Verna came over in June to see the paint. I gave her the whole tour, the new light over the sink, the porch swing, the pothos in my office window, that I've somehow kept alive for 1.5 years and water every Thursday like it's a religion. And then we came to the hallway. She stopped. She didn't say anything for a while. She looked at that green, and then she looked at the girl on the sidewalk with the folding table, and she looked a long time, the way she looks at a column that finally comes out even. Then she said, "Quiet. That's the one who did all this," I said. "She didn't know that." "No," Verna said. "But you did. That was 2 Junes ago now. I don't keep notes on my own life anymore. I don't write down the times of phone calls or the color of somebody's car. I stopped needing the record the day I stopped needing to prove. I was telling the truth to a man who already knew it. I walk past that photograph every morning on my way to make coffee, and some mornings I don't even look at it, and that's how I know I'm all right. She's the one who did all this. I've just been paying her back ever since.